What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and today we're going to cover some of the most commonly found issues that you might encounter within the dynamic parkour tray system and how to be able to fix them for your project. So let's go ahead and dive in. So I have here my testing project that I use, and this is currently up to date with the most up to date version of the system. Now, I'm going to be covering a few different things that I have found. Some of these are things that people have asked me about, other things I've just found on my own. And I just kind of want to make it a little easier for you guys to be able to figure out kind of what the prevention of certain actions or the issue is. So I'm going to cover the first two commonly found things that I've been asked about, and then we'll kind of go into some more less commonly asked about things, but still might be helpful to you. And the top thing that I've been seeing is the floating and walking through objects when trying to perform. So something like this, when you try to perform an action, and next thing you know, he's just floating, he's got no collision, things just look broken, right? Well, this is happening due to the fact that it's trying to select an action that you have set to allow. However, there is no animation in there. So for example, that was a narrow vault action. As you can see right now, I have in the vault over short section of the animation selector, it's set to none. There's no asset in there right now. However, I've made a copy of the old one just so I don't have to go finding it again. If I put this in there, it's the same thing. The only difference is I don't have to go searching for the vault over short animation in my content browser. But so if I go ahead and just put that in there, so that's just again just adding the animation for that action, it will then work accordingly. You can also just disable the action by going into the component section, dynamic parkour tray system, and looking for the allowed action section for that action. Now, if you're also having trouble figuring out which action it might be, one good way to figure it out is if you take your character blueprint, put it off to the side here, kind of, make it so that way you can see the execution of things. And then when you go ahead and hit play, make sure that your debug object is set to your spawned character type. And then if I go ahead and hit, you can see that it's the top rightmost one that's executing. It's like, okay, so that tells me that it's this one that's executing. From here, all we really need to do is zoom in on that so we know it's a vault action, pull off and get a print string, and then we can plug this enumeration into the print string. So then if we hit play again, we can see that vault over short is now printed out at the top of the screen. There's also something else being printed out that I forgot to take out of this particular project. So don't mind the number, but as you can see, now we know that that's the vault over short. So if you wanted to allow vault over short, then you just need to add an animation. If you didn't, you just need to go into the vault actions and make sure that it's set to not being allowed. And this is just as easy as going to ground action settings, vault action settings, allowed actions, and setting the short distance vault to false. Now, another common problem that I've noticed that people sometimes have is specifically during climbing, and it's the character is not really going to the location properly. So, just to show you an example, granted, I've created a bit of an extreme example, but we climb up to the ledge, works fine. If I go to the right, as you can see, he attached the ledge accordingly. However, you might experience something like this sometimes, where it gets offset really horribly. Now, this is actually due to motion warping. I will say is motion warping is an amazing tool, but it is a little finicky, and you have to be a little patient with how you set things up. So if I open up the, these are my jump animations here for my, for the climb jump. So if I open up the left, and I'm going to take the right and open it in a new window here, so that way I can show you them both side by side. So as you saw, the left was not really getting to the location. It was kind of going well past it. And the reason for that is, as you can see here, the window is defined a little early. Realistically, we would probably want to define it somewhere like here, where he really does kind of attach to the ledge. And if I just push this up to right about there, which if I show you the right, that's right about the same point that the right animation is on. And then if I click on save, click on play, and then I go left, you can see that he attaches to the ledge just like he's supposed to. So there are certain things that are going to be related to motion warping more than anything. And sometimes it does just take a bit of patience in refining of that location. Sometimes you got to move it back a little bit. Sometimes you got to move it forward a little bit. Adjust the climbing and the motion warps line up. And you can see that now we got that nice smooth left jump again. So this is something that you can always play around with in the motion warp windows, but if you do encounter this issue, one way to be able to be certain that it is motion warping and not the system, just so that way you can know what to look at, is if we go ahead and go into the miscellaneous section, the overrides, and make sure the show debug spheres is enabled, what we can do is when we hit play, you'll see the yellow sphere is right below the character. It's a little hard to see because of the jacket hang, but you can see that the yellow sphere is directly in the center. If your character does not align to that sphere, it's generally something in the motion warping window, because that's the location that's provided by the system for motion warping to go to. So just so that way you guys know exactly how things are being set up. Now, another thing that you might encounter with ledge placements is a bit of jittering. So I'm going to go and push this a little forward here, and this is usually what's caused by this. So if we go ahead and hit play now, and I go up to the ledge here, and I go to the left, you're going to see that there's a really harsh jitter, and he also misaligns himself from the ledge. This is actually because, again, it's a motion warping, not really issue, but it's just kind of the way it was set up. If the motion of the root bone is no longer moving anymore, and it knows that, hey, we haven't completed our movement yet, it's going to create that jittering that you're seeing. So essentially what you want to do is, that's why right around here, maybe around, frame 23, a little after, you can see that right about there is where he plants his feet, his hands get planted, and it's mostly his pelvis from here that's kind of adjusting into position and then back up, right? We don't really need the pelvis movement. We need to know where the root bone rotation or movement is, because that's what motion warping is going to use. So if we define that based off of when that root bone is reaching its position, which is, again, right about there, go ahead and hit save and then hit play. We'll make sure I'm actually over an area that I'm not just going to fall through. And then I go ahead and hit the left. You can see that that jittering is a lot less. Still a little bit there, so we can probably define that a little bit better. Maybe bring it back. Hope I'm moving the whole window. Maybe bring it back about another little bit there. So again, it's just, kind of adjusting it, maybe one frame at a time is usually all it really needs. You can see that that one adjustment fixed it. So it's small adjustments can make a big difference. You don't need to make large adjustments like this or this to be able to see it. You are going to see a difference even with just going from frame 23 to 24. Now, one of the less common issues, but still something you might experience depending on how you have your map set up, is if you are setting up your climb points. So this is an example of climb points that have been set up and set to a point style, but they're a little wider than what I have demonstrated in other videos. So, for example, if I go up to this right now and I try to climb up to it, it'll climb up to it just fine. But if I try to move left and right, it doesn't really work, and the trace looks like it's multiplying, and there's a reason for that. So, the system is looking at first to see if the trace is colliding with itself. And if it is, it's moving itself back. And this is just to be able to try to adjust, so this way it can still possibly find something. But it only does this if it's colliding with itself, which, as you can see, the first few traces are green start to finish, and then the last trace is red start to finish, meaning that it's not finding anything. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck to making your objects of a specific length. It means that you just have to adjust a setting. So if we go into the dynamic parkour trace system components inside of our character blueprint, so for me, that's the BP third person character. And then we go into the settings, climb settings, and look at the climb trace options. Make this a little bit bigger here. And look at the climb point search trace settings. You're going to see there's a trace start side offset. Currently the value is set to 60, but if we set this to something higher, let's say, just 150, just to set it to a bit of a exaggerated number, you can see that it starts a little bit offset from it. But, even still, when I'm at the edge of this object, it's still not quite there. So I might have to set it to, maybe 180. So we'll go ahead and see that. So we'll go ahead and move right, and then we'll see, okay, yep, you can see that it's going and tracing. Now, there is one issue with this, though, just to point out, and this is something I am working on trying to kind of implement something that works a little bit better, but it doesn't really create an issue. It's just that if I go ahead and now go back to the left, you can see that there's about a full square of a difference there. That full square of a difference is ultimately just going to mean that it's not going to find anything if you have a climb point that close. Now, generally speaking, you're not going to have points that close together, at least normally. Obviously, there are going to be instances where you might, but I'm just pointing out that realistically, you can adjust these values and set this to something that's going to work for you, but for right now, it is set to a static value. But if you do have this issue where the trace is not quite working, and it seems like it's colliding with itself and just ignoring everything, what you can do is just go ahead and just kind of, adjust that value and make it so that way it'll work. But if you see that, like what I just demonstrated, that's what's happening. Now, the last issue that you might encounter is if you're trying to use the slide input, the slide function, in, trying to do some like, drop actions as well as being able to use the jump input. You might experience certain like issues with trying to get the jump to work, and where it'll do something like that and force an action instead. Um, so one thing to keep in mind is that there is actually a value inside to control. So this way, instead of getting those actions, you can then get a jump instead. And how you control this is actually very easy. So if we go back into the BP third person character, go to the dynamic parkour trace system, and then we take a look at the ground action settings here. We're just gonna need to open up the gap action settings and then go to gap action distance settings, and you're gonna see distance to edge to perform action. You can use this value to set it closer or farther from the ledge to be able to make it so that way they have to be a little, more on the actual edge for an action to occur. You can see that time I was fairly close to it, but it did not do anything. However, if I go ahead and I make sure I'm really close to the ledge, 50 might be a little too close. But ultimately, if I set this to maybe like 100, it'll probably work better. But essentially, you get the point. When you're setting this value, you can use this to be able to influence when jump will take over, just the free jump like that, or when it'll actually do an action. As you can see, like it just did one, but a little close to the ledge, so there wasn't really a lot of movement. And there is a science to setting the values, but it's really all about not only just your animations, but the type of game you're trying to create. So that's why you have these values to be able to kind of adjust everything that you would need when it comes to how the actual gap and drop systems work. All right, so there's one final thing that I did want to cover just really quickly, as it might be something you guys might have an issue with just with the way the default settings are. So I wanted to show this. So you might have certain experiences where if you're on a object, let's say about this height, it'll allow certain actions, like for example, I can do this, where obviously that's probably not exactly proper. There is a way to be able to change this, make it so this way that does not happen. So if we go into the dynamic parkour trace system component section, go into the trace settings, under the ground action settings, going into the gap action settings, do this from the start here. And then if we open up the gap trace settings, expand this a bit, and then the section that says gap action settings up/across, you're going to see that there's an option that says trace Z length. Set this to something around like 150, and this will stop that from happening. Essentially, it's just tracing and saying, oh, hey, we found that there's an actual gap here. This value will actually make it so that way it kind of controls how far down a drop off is. So this actually helps with like terrain differentials, certain drop-offs that you don't really want to do an action off of, but you still want to be able to have it recognize. This will help control that setting. But those are the primary things that I've seen people ask about and have issues with. So I did want to make sure to kind of show this to you guys and really I hope this does clarify some issues that you may be having. If you have any others or experiencing any other issues, please reach out to me on the Discord. I am pretty much always active, always keeping an eye on that, so this way I can help you guys as much as I can with any issues with the system. But that's really all the kind of main things I can think of here, guys. But if you guys find any more things, I'll make sure to keep putting out videos and keep fixing things. And with any luck, this will be the parkour go-to. Let's go. But anyways, that's going to close out for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was informative. But we got more videos coming out, so I hope to see you then. But until then, stay tuned and stay animated.